As a prisoner of war, survival is a battle in itself. Faced with unimaginable hardship in the worst conditions, you need courage, luck, and a healthy dose of inspiration. Well, for hundreds of prisoners of war held captive by the Japanese during the Second World War, that inspiration would come from an extraordinary man. A doctor, surgeon, and a man of enormous courage and compassion, Weary Dunlop. Ernest Edward Dunlop was anything but weary. He earned his nickname while playing football because, like the advertisement for the famous Dunlop tyre said, he never wore out. He studied pharmacy and medicine and even played rugby union for Australia as a wallaby in 1932 and 1934. He had been a cadet at school and went on to join the army services, which he continued with part-time at university until 1929. He studied in London to become a Fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons, and in 1935 he enlisted in the full-time Australian Army, where he was commissioned with the rank of captain into the Australian Army Medical Corps. When the Second World War broke out, Weary was posted to the Middle East, where he served in Palestine, Greece and Crete. He became senior surgeon at Tobruk in Libya before the Australians were withdrawn to fight the Japanese army that was now invading Southeast Asian countries. In 1942, elements of the 6th and 7th Australian Divisions arrived on the island of Java in what is now Indonesia. It was here that Dunlop was given the temporary rank of Lieutenant Colonel and was placed in command of No. 1 Allied General Hospital at Bandung. But within 6 weeks, Java had been captured by the Japanese and the Australians were taken as prisoners of war, moved to a formidable walled stone building with confining iron bars. Weary was placed in charge of the Commonwealth prisoners. He set about encouraging education, sport and entertainment to try to keep up the morale and maintain the health of his fellow prisoners. Despite the personal risk of it being discovered, Dunlop kept a diary. This diary provides a first-hand account of what life was like as a prisoner of war. He recorded some of the hazards of life in the prison camp apart from the Japanese army guards. Here's one example. I had an appalling affair with a large rat which got inside my mosquito net and chewed my hair, finally running over my face and becoming tangled in the net. Finally the rat escaped. He bit my chest twice. Damn him and his family. But Weary's time in Java was about to end. Now, because the sea routes were considered dangerous, in 1942 Japanese High Command decided to build a 415-kilometre railway line through the jungle, linking Burma to Thailand. This railway would help the Japanese with their plan to attack Commonwealth forces in India and assist in transporting the soldiers, weapons and equipment required for an extended campaign against the Allies in Burma. But the Burma-Thailand Railway would be hand-built by the thousands of Allied prisoners of war forced to work by the Japanese, along with many more Asian civilian labourers known as Ramusha. It became known as the Death Railway. By the time it was completed, some 102,000 prisoners of war and local workers had died during its construction. With some 900 men under his command, what was known as the Dunlop Force was sent to the infamous Changi prison in Singapore, and then on to southwest Thailand where the men were put to work constructing the railway. Dunlop's unit was sent to the Hintok River camp where he devised a system of cooperative leadership. The camp adopted some important survival principles. 2 of these were the fit looked after the sick and the young looked after the old. But the fitness and health of the prisoners was irrelevant to the Japanese, who were impatient to build the railway. As Dunlop wrote in his diary on the 19th of March 1943, tomorrow 600 men are required for the railway. Light duty men, no duty men, and all men without boots to go just the same. This is the next thing to murder. The Japanese guards treated their prisoners cruelly, denying them the most basic of requirements such as food and medical assistance. They would often beat the prisoners and would force them to work until some simply died. Weary rallied his fellow prisoners to try and survive the cruelty and indignation of the circumstances under which they were now living. He led by example and assumed the enormous responsibility of looking after his men's welfare. When he stood up to his captors, he was sometimes badly beaten and even threatened with execution. As pressure to finish the railway increased, conditions for the men deteriorated even further as the Japanese soldiers forcibly removed sick and weak prisoners from the hospital, demanding they continue to work. All the while, Dunlop and his medical staff did their best to help their fellow soldiers try to overcome starvation, malnutrition, malaria, beriberi, cholera, dysentery, tropical ulcers and a host of other conditions. With no medical supplies, he often improvised, making artificial legs from bamboo and crude medical equipment from whatever bits and pieces he and others could find. Examples of his improvised medical equipment include bedpans made from bamboo, cutlery turned into surgical equipment, and petrol tins made into containers for boiling water in which you could sterilise surgical items. Weary's reputation for keeping cool under the most appalling conditions became legend among the men he commanded. He was described as a lighthouse of sanity in a universe of madness and suffering. His care and concern for the other prisoners meant that lives were saved where in other circumstances they might have been lost. After the war, Weary Dunlop received numerous awards and honours, including Australian of the Year in 1977, a Companion of the Order of Australia, and even a knighthood to become Sir Edward Weary Dunlop. Weary died in 1993 at the age of 85. As one of the 106 Australian prisoner of war medical officers, Weary's story of service represents their self-sacrifice, courage and compassion.